Hello and welcome to this evening's SNJ webinar on the SEND reform proposals. I'm Tanya Tiraoro and I'm joined tonight by my co-directors, Sharon Smith. Behind the scenes for now is Gillian Doherty. So, Sharon.
Yes, good evening and welcome to the webinar. We're absolutely delighted to be joined tonight by the Education Minister who has responsibility for the SEND proposals and SEND reforms, Georgia Gould MP. Welcome, Minister.
Thanks so much for having us. Having me, just.
We can do the royal way if you like, that's okay.
No, exactly. It's been a long day, sorry.
It's been a royal day, hasn't it? So as you will have seen on the slate, hopefully everybody, we've got the most popular questions to start off with that were sent in a quick fire half hour. And then Jill will parachute in to bring the questions that you will be asking. So ask away. Only put questions in the Q&A, please. Don't answer the questions yourself in the Q&A because then we get all confused. But if you've got something to share, put it in the chat because I know there's a lot of expertise in the attendees. So do share your expertise in the chat. We've got people monitoring the chat and the Q&As for any nuggets that you may impart as well.
Absolutely. So just before we move on, I just want to return to the poll because we had two questions. And in terms of the second question, let me just see if I can get the responses up there. So the question that was asked was, have you responded to the consultation? And we know that this closes on Monday, the 18th at 11:59 p.m. So we may all have busy weekends ahead of us. So 37% of people responded, said yes, they have already responded to that consultation. 5% have said yes, they have, but they'd like to add more. So I don't know if that's something that people can do, and maybe the Minister will be able to comment on how people can do that. 53% have said no, but I will be responding, and 5% have just said no. So maybe it's not something that they want to respond to or feel that they're able to. And I can just see someone that has put in the chat, I'm waiting until after tonight to respond. So we're delighted we're able to help you with your responses.
Yeah, and we are one of those who say yes, but we haven't yet. So
We are.
we've got a few days to do it. So let's get started. Georgia Gould, you'll be aware, of course, of the judicial review that's been launched regarding the missing questions. Are you prepared to extend and refine the consultation, I guess to make that go away or because of that?
Yeah. Hi, Tanya and Sharon, and just a massive thank you for having me today, and really appreciate the chance to talk to everyone. And I've got the chat open, so hopefully I can see the comments as they're coming through. So I can't obviously comment on the judicial review itself, but in terms of the consultation, I can be really clear that we're consulting on every aspect of the proposals, and the responses we've had back so far include responses that focus on all aspects of proposals, from tribunals to EHCPs. We've been doing there's a kind of consultation document itself, but then we've been doing a number of different events, online events, in-person events. I was at one this morning to give an opportunity to deep dive on some of these issues, and we've had, I think, very good attendance and very good engagement in those events. Sharon, I don't hope you don't mind me saying, but with another hat on, you're part of our complex needs group that met earlier today, where we had a very detailed conversation about issues around redress and accountability. So I think my real message to everyone who is watching this today is that we really do want to hear your views on wherever you think that you have something to contribute, whether that's something you think we're getting right, or whether it's an area that you think that needs to change or isn't right. Because I think something that has been so important to me throughout this process has been listening to the lived experience of parents and young people, but also professionals, teachers, practitioners, and you you know the system best, and it's really critically important we hear from you. So the consultation is going to end on May the 18th, but we really welcome contributions on all aspects of the proposals. And there is a free question where people can put more detailed information on any aspect that they would like to.
Thank you. And just before I ask the next question, I just want to check as well. We've been discussing this amongst our team today. There is an option for people to email with non-written responses as well to the consultation, to the consultation email address. I just want to check, Minister Gould, that is correct.
Yes, there is, and there is an easy read version of a consultation, a BSL version. They can send videos or any other format. And alongside the kind of set piece events we've been doing, online events and regional events, we're doing a range of events with young people with lots of different needs, and we're really grateful to organisations that have helped us reach communities that maybe would struggle to be part of some of those formal events. And I think we've got some really rich and detailed feedback. And I know the Down Syndrome Association is one of those organisations, but many others. So if anyone watching doesn't quite feel able to fill in the consultation form, then I would encourage them to, if there's an organisation that they work with, a local parent carer forum, there are kind of other routes to put in their feedback. And of course, that you can
email address.
Those. We can put the email address, the details in the chat.
We'll make sure that we share that. Absolutely, thank you. So the question that I was going to ask, and this is something that we're hearing a lot, is if you believe the reforms are going to improve inclusion, improve earlier support, and that should then hopefully translate into fewer appeals and potentially the need for fewer EHCPs. Why not let that work through the system rather than reducing legal rights and enforceable provision?
Thanks, Sharon, for the question. I think the starting point for me is how we improve the system. And I've spoken to thousands of parents and young people, and I think that the overwhelming response has been one where parents particularly have described the system as a battle, that they have to wait too long to get support, sometimes waiting years watching their children falling behind, and that the system as it stands isn't working. And it's there has been more money going into special educational needs and disabilities, but that we haven't seen that improve outcomes. And in fact, there is just a huge failure in the system. So we want to change it, to make it better, and that is our that is the intention behind the reforms. And over the next period, we'll be investing significantly more money in special educational needs and disabilities. I think the focus is on putting more support in place earlier, because I've spoken to many families who actually don't think they should have needed to escalate to an EHCP, but it was the only way to get access to, say, a speech and language support or other support for their child, which they felt in a different system could have been managed much easier. So we're trying to put more resource directly into schools and wrapped around schools, so that when needs emerge, the school, drawing on the experts at hand, which for those who have looked at the proposals in less detail includes speech and language therapists, educational psychologists, occupational therapists, but also specialist teachers, that all of that is just part of the mainstream system and develops new layers of support. But we also see massive inconsistency around the country and a lack of clarity of what an access point to an EHCP and specialist support is, and real inconsistency in what provision there is in local places. So we're trying to create a far better mix of provision around the country.
But why do you need to make it more? Why do you need to make it harder to get the EHCP though? Why change the law? Because you can do all that stuff, brilliant stuff that you're proposing that we do support, without changing the legal thresholds. That's what people are angry about.
So we're retaining EHCPs, but what we want to do is, when the reforms are fully in, bring down effectively the resource that would have, it would have had to, you'd had to fight to get an EHC, bring that down so it's just available in schools and schools can plan for the needs that they see in their classroom.
Yeah,
so
and that's fantastic.
Let me give you an example.
You don't have to change the threshold to do that. That's the point, I think, that everybody's saying.
So at the moment, if you're a child in primary school, you might need some more support. It might take a few years in order to get that EHCP in place. Money comes with that EHCP with that child, and then they're there for a couple of years. They leave for school. They might have a one-to-one support staff. The school can't afford to provide that anymore. There may be 3 EHCPs in that year, and they're funding some specialist provision around that. And that is really hard for schools to then plan to have consistent provision available for children. The idea is by moving the system so you have more money going directly to schools, ring fence for children with SEND. The schools then, when children have needs that emerge, can develop individual support plans that are available in that school. They don't need to go through an external assessment. They don't need to go through an external process, but that is just available for them, including access to those experts at hand. But if their needs, go beyond that, then they can still have access to an EHCP. So we're just trying to, I suppose I think that it was, I think you'd agree with me, Tanya, it was never the intention that the EHCP would be.
No, absolutely. Because the intention was to do exactly what you're saying. That was, in fact, that is exactly how the law is set up. But because of austerity came in, and then there was obviously not Labour's fault or any of that, but austerity came in, so it was much more difficult. And schools, when they got their SEND budget, they were spending it on, the plumbing and things, because it wasn't ring fenced. So there are things that can be done that would then return the EHCPs to exactly what you've just said, without changing, because it is supposed to only be for those children who need that extra funding. So schools, you're exactly right. If they did get that funding, then they wouldn't have
provide that clarity of what needs that extra support over and above what a new mainstream system will look like. And I think that's really important to say, is that many people on this call, I know, because I've spoken to so many parents, will have been badly failed in the current system by their local authority, by their school, and will be listening to me and thinking like, this has just not been our experience. And so mainstream schools need to change. And there's like a number of planks, I think, that need to deliver that change. Firstly, the proposal is for national inclusion standards that create those minimum expectations on schools that would be set out nationally. That's never existed before. The second is it will be mandatory to train every teacher to support children with special educational needs and disabilities, something so many parents, and actually particularly young people, have said to me. So many young people have said the thing that makes the biggest difference is feeling seen as a young person by their teacher. And I know teachers want to do that, but there's a real confidence in supporting them to be able to deliver that. We're delivering new standards for buildings, so they need to be inclusive by design, not just about accessibility for physical disabilities, but lighting, acoustics, to make mainstream schools genuinely inclusive, and creating these new layers of support with individual support plans. And I know we'll get into all the detail, but I think that it's important
taking that away, the school action plus, that was a mistake, and moving, and so you are. I mean, we don't. I think that is a good idea, because it switches in people's minds that. So you're talking about the ISPs, and there is a legal right, as you were saying, for every child with SEND to have one. Good idea. But you will have heard lots of people asking, but do they get the legal right, the provision within it? And if they then don't get that provision, what are they going to do? Because if they then complain, you're going to get a whole load of volunteer governors going, I'm not doing this, and they'll be leaving. So that's 2 points. Is it guaranteed, and is there a good legal right of or any kind of appeal that isn't just a complaint?
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. And on all of this, I'm going to run through what our proposals are, but I think it's really important to keep iterating. This is a consultation. So if when I'm running through it, you think, actually, this isn't quite right, that, we really want to hear those perspectives, and I'm coming in that mindset. So the proposal is that schools, that we would have an independent panel nationally, which would set out these national inclusion standards, which would set those minimum expectations for schools. Each school would have a legal duty to develop an inclusion plan about how they drive inclusion throughout the school, kind of linked to accountability, which will go right through to Ofsted. And they'd also have a legal duty to develop individual support plans with parents and young people. And I think that's really important, because something I've heard a lot is at the moment, it often doesn't feel like a collaborative process. And parents say to me, my child, masks at school, and it all comes out at home, and we don't have a space to be able to be part of that conversation. So that collaboration is really key. You're right, Tanya, that the current proposal is that if a parent was unhappy with that individual support plan, they would be able to use the school complaints process. And our proposal is to develop a new independent SEND role that would, provide some robustness and SEND expertise in that process. But as you say, this is something I've had lots of questions about, and really interested to hear people's perspectives on this question of accountability. But the other route to accountability is that Ofsted will be looking at individual support plans, and that is really important for schools and shaping how schools look at things. Ofsted are now looking at inclusion for the first time, and again, that
Thematic survey, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but not just in the thematic survey, but in their day-to-day inspections of schools. And we are bringing in inspections for multi-academy trusts on the kind of decision, which will include decision making around inclusion. So new layers of accountability will kind of govern inclusion and make that a key priority. And that has not been the case in the past. The government has not said inclusion is key to our education system, and we want to drive this through. That's not been part of the accountability system. And then I think the third thing that's important to say is that the proposal is that a parent would still be able to ask for a needs assessment. And I think one of the ways that I think initially the reforms were misinterpreted was that everything is a ladder. You have to go through each ladder before you get a certain layer. So parents can still ask for a needs assessment, and if they're unhappy,
without going through those support,
without going through all the steps, yeah.
And if they're unhappy with the outcome of that needs assessment, that they can still go to the tribunal. And that was actually something that changed through the engagement. Some people might have seen, it was reported in newspapers, that we were proposing that you move that accountability to the first needs assessment to the local government ombudsman. And that was with good intent, because we thought that would be quicker. And one of the things I hear a lot is people are spending a lot of money on tribunals, but the groups that we were engaging with made absolutely clear that they felt that the tribunal needed to be a backstop to that needs assessment. I'm just saying that as an example of something.
No, that's great, and I think that's a great segue. I was going to say,
can I just clarify that you said about the legal duty? So will it be a legal duty for the provision in the ISP?
No, at the moment, the provision would be determined between the school, the parent, the young person, in line with the national inclusion standards. So,
and if it's not, so there's no legal duty on once they're decided that's what I'm going to have.
So yeah, the redress and accountability is what I've described in the proposal. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Sharon.
I was going to say it's a really nice segue, because you were talking about tribunals, and my next question is about tribunals. Yes. But if you can forgive me, I do have another question just linked to what you were talking about. So obviously some ISPs are going to be for children who have education, health and care plans. So one of the sort of concerns is around the move from having specified provision in section F of an EHCP and moving that into an ISP. So lots of parents are seeing that as obviously reduced enforceability, because at the moment, obviously, if it's in section F, you can enforce the local authority to deliver that. Now, I heard slightly differently in a conversation recently, which was that some of the provision that the local, basically if it's specialist provision packages, the local authority are commissioning that, and it will still be in section F, and it's only the school-based provision that's going to be in the ISP. And I think it'd be really good to have some clarity about exactly what will and won't be in the ISP, particularly for those children and young people who have an EHCP.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. And I think this is something that we're genuinely consulting on and working through as part of the consultation, and something we've been discussing as part of the deep dives. For children who have an EHCP, we expect them to have two documents, as you've set out: the EHCP, which would set out their broad entitlement, their health and care support, and the ISP, which would be much more their day-to-day provision agreed with the school, and that wouldn't be finalized until that we knew the setting. And the reason behind that is because we often hear that provision is written by a caseworker who's actually never met the child, and that detailed conversation is really could be positively done at a school level, so it's more flexible, and there is the ability to continue to work together with the parent and the school. So that's the intention behind having that distinction between the ISP and the EHCP. But what sits in both documents is something that I'm really interested in views of those watching today, because it's something that we're working through.
So we could potentially keep all of that provision still in section F of the EHCP, whilst having that flexible ISP that details the sort of day-to-day provision potentially. But obviously, I understand you're wanting to hear views on that. Back to the tribunal, and this is something we've also had a lot of parents commenting on. Now, we know within the proposals, and they are just proposals, that there are plans to change tribunal powers, and you've said that there is obviously you've retained the tribunal for those EHC needs assessment appeals, but there's a sort of proposal to remove the ability for the tribunal to name a specific school or setting. And I think parents are particularly concerned about that in terms of firstly, the fact that they're often having to appeal that in the first place, but also the concern that they're going to end up in a doom loop where the tribunal will just send back to the local authority and say, you need to reconsider your decision, and then they reconsider it, and then the parent has to appeal again, and back we go. And as you've just said, the EHCP and the ISP is actually going to be setting specific moving forward. So the child could be left without any suitable provision whilst parents are going round and round in that appeal process. We just wondered what the justification was for that. And again, if you could sort of explain, because lots of concern.
Totally. And again, I'll explain the thinking behind the proposals, and we are consulting on them. So in the proposals, we're proposing that there is still a strong role for the SEND Tribunal. So the SEND Tribunal would be the backstop to the needs assessment process, as I set out. It would also be the backstop to the specialist provision package in the proposals. And so a parent, if they were unhappy with the specialist provision package their child received, would be able to go to tribunal on that. We are proposing, Sharon, as you set out, a change to the tribunal's role on placements. So kind of the starting point to the changes, and I think we're going to get into specialist provision packages in more detail. So I'll just kind of say something high level, but go into the detail later, is that we expect through the specialist provision packages that we are going to ensure that there is a standard by which you have to meet to qualify to offer a specialist provision package. So if a child is assessed as needing a certain specialist provision package, the local authority would need to offer them a place that met the conditions of that specialist provision package, and that's something that all local authorities would need to do. So when it came to a placement decision, the placements offered to those parents should already meet a quality threshold, and I think that's really important. But we are proposing that the tribunal would be able to squash the decision of a local authority if it didn't meet the needs of the child, but the tribunal would not be able to name a place. And the reason why we're proposing that change is because of a lot of the consultation we've been doing, particularly with special schools, is that places are being consistently named where the special school can't meet those needs, that it's the school is over full. I've talked to a school that had to close as a result of that, and we want to move to a system where we are really clear that there are enough places in that local area to meet the needs of all the children. Now, the tribunal is not best placed to do place planning. They don't know who else is on the waiting list for those places, but they are really well placed to kind of make checks on the back of that provision. So we're trying to create the balance between the rights of parents to make sure their child, or the rights of a child fundamentally, to get a place that meets their needs, but also to ensure that we actually have a system where there are enough specialist places within a local area and enough for the need in that place. And so that's the thinking behind the proposal. But I absolutely hear that concern that's been raised with me about this ping pong issue, and so that's, again, really, really welcome further.
I guess you could say that the tribunal would be able to name a place with the caveat that the school could say, we don't have those spaces. But let's move on. We've so many questions. I will be lynched if we don't ask this question about EOTAS. It's not in the white paper. It's caused an awful lot of worry and dismay. So firstly, can you confirm, that EOTAS will remain a lawful, funded, enforceable provision, and that they won't risk losing at their next key stage transfer review? And if so, if it will be, who will create, because at the moment the EHCP, that's created and managed by the LA. So who will manage it, and where will it fit into these 7 categories?
Yeah, Tanya. And it's very clear. And this is a question I've also had so much through the consultation, that this question of why is EOTAS not mentioned in the consultation. And the answer to that is because it is something that we saw as being developed. The answer to the question of how to support children who are not in a setting, we saw as something that would be developed as part of the work on the specialist provision packages. So we're proposing to appoint a panel of national health and education experts who would develop the specialist provision packages and look at the kind of range of needs within that. And so we do want as many children as possible to be in a school, and we and to make sure that our schools can meet the needs of as many children as possible. But we do also recognise that for some young people that isn't possible, and so we know that there will need to be continuing support, and that's something we see as being developed as part of the specialist provision packages. But as a result of the kind of questions and focus on this, it's something that we've organised deep dives on and are looking at really carefully, and very happy again to take views on that.
Yeah, we have quite a few EOTAS experts in our community that I'm sure would.
That would be great, Tanya. Thank you. I'd really appreciate that.
Sharon.
And so the 7 specialist provision packages have also been quite controversial in terms of obviously families being concerned that their child or young person is being having to fit into a particular box. And I think there's a lack of clarity about whether these are criteria to get an EHCP, whether they are commissioning pathways, whether they relate only to special schools and inclusion bases. And you'll know from previous discussions that we've had, Minister, that there's a lot of concern about how these are going to work for mainstream inclusion. So I think, given the level of feedback you've had and the questions that have been raised, are you rethinking about specialist provision packages, or are you still seeing these very much as part of the proposals and the way forward?
So I think firstly, like, it'd be good, maybe good, helpful to just clarify what we mean by specialist provision packages, if that's all right. So the thinking behind specialist provision packages is to try and ensure that there is the right mix of specialist provision in an area. So at the moment, something I hear time and time again from families is that their child has a particular need. It's agreed that they need specialist support, but actually in their local area or even in the surrounding areas, there aren't any places that meet the needs of that child. And so the work done on specialist provision packages are to ensure that local authorities are commissioning the broad range of provision that you would need to in a place. And so that wouldn't mean that a child would need to kind of draw on everything which sits within a specialist provision package, but that, for example, if their need was for kind of intensive physiotherapy, that they would need a place at a school or a setting that was able to provide that intensive physiotherapy, for example. And we've put out a kind of draft of the specialist provision packages that people might have seen. It's an annex to the consultation. But the idea is that the national panel of experts that I talked about will kind of work this up, and it will be reviewed annually to ensure that local authorities are commissioning the right support in place. But I think it's really important, your point, Sharon, and we've discussed this, that children with EHCPs will also still be in mainstream schools and will still potentially need packages around that. And that's the kind of second element that we want the panel to work up. So what packages look like when they're a placement in a special school, but also what that wraparound support looks like at a mainstream school. And we heard about children who are out of school. So there's a lot of work to do on that detail, but the intention behind it is not to try and fit every child in a box. Children's needs are, of course, unique, but within special schools at the moment, often, when I visit a special school, there might be a number of pathways that offer a certain kind of provision that supports a child, and children draw on different elements that school has to offer, but it helps that has been commissioned, that place is there, and you don't end up in a situation where many families have told me they have a child who's very academic, really high social and emotional needs. It's very internalizing, and actually
neurodivergent.
They find that there isn't that they haven't been able to cope in mainstream school, and there isn't a place for them within the packages. The idea behind them is that you ensure that there were the right places locally for those range of needs. But this is again an area where we're doing a lot of work.
Okay, so I can definitely see how they could work as those sort of commission packages in specialist, and I just wonder whether there's an opportunity maybe that they are just for those children that are in specialist, and something else is needed for mainstream inclusion and to support that ambition to have the right support. And I'm now going to hand over.
So time to bring in Jill, who, along with the rest of the team, has been furiously typing down what people have been asking. There's been hundreds of questions, 231 questions. So obviously we're not going to get through those. So Jill.
Yeah, so I think what we'll try to do is look at some of the questions that are most upvoted, and also perhaps look at some of those questions that have emerged as a theme that hasn't been covered as well. But I'm going to start with, so I think this question has been upvoted in all its forms. Lots of people have asked the same question, but basically, why are the proposed reforms looking at removing legal rights instead of addressing the lack of compliance with the current legislation by local authorities on an industrial scale, as this appears to be a main cause of the problems in SEND? Other people have asked us similar versions, about removing the rights of the tribunal as the only recourse that parents have. So yes, why aren't you tackling the fact that local authorities are routinely breaking the law?
Yeah, I think this issue of accountability of local authorities has been one of the things that I've heard most strongly in the consultation. And it's really important to be clear that what we're talking about and our proposals are to start to transition into this new system in 2030. So all the current laws remain in place, and it is, I've heard from too many parents who have been failed, and it shouldn't be on individual parents to always have to hold the system to account. And I've spoken to parents. A mum recently told me she spent £400,000 on legal fees, which is just unimaginably awful, and it just should never have happened. So I think there is a really important issue of local authority accountability, and it's something that we're taking seriously in the DFE, and I think we need to be better at. And we've written to all local authorities to ask them to develop SEND reform plans that have a kind of whole host of questions, such as co-production with parents and young people, information about the number of professionals that they have supporting schools, children who are out of education, and many more. And we are going to kind of at the end of that process be looking at where there needs to be further intervention. We have a number of levers already to intervene in local authorities, but where we need to go further, and the kind of full range of interventions right through to removing SEN from local authorities, as we've had to do in some cases with children's social care. So that robustness of accountability, I think, is really, really important. And then within the SEND reform proposals, there is proposals around strengthening Ofsted and CQC. There's also a proposal which is about tribunal judgments, and far greater transparency on tribunal judgments and the action that local authorities take in response to those tribunals, because that's something
I'll just ask a question about that, because essentially there's going to be a much reduced role for the tribunal. So it seems at the moment 99% of the cases that go to hearing are upheld in favour of the families, and the solution to that is to remove rights and reduce accountability. That just feels wrong. Essentially local authorities have broken the law, so you're removing the law and you're reducing accountability. So I think it doesn't make sense to anybody. I think they're asking, why aren't you tackling directly and on an individual basis the law breaking? Because it's routine across many, many local authorities. They are breaking the law on an industrial scale, as the question asks. Why not tackle that instead of essentially removing rights so that they don't have to do anything?
So, as I said, we're going to be holding local authorities accountable for their provision, but also their action on tribunal judgments. The tribunals will remain an important part of a new system. I've explained the change we're making to the tribunal and the thinking behind it, but we still see the tribunal as an important backstop. But these reforms will not have worked if the only way that parents can get support for their children is having to go through a tribunal. There has to be accountability on local authorities, on schools, on health services to deliver for children. That collective responsibility in the DFE, I think, has a critical role in providing that accountability, as does Ofsted and CQC.
But they won't essentially be able to go to the tribunal about most things under the new system.
So, I've gone through the tribunal will be a backstop to the needs assessment, to the specialist provision packages, and we're making the change that I described.
Okay, I'm just going to move on.
The parents just go, it's just not fair, is it? You know, they've done this for all these years to us, and now they're like laughing. They're like, I've got away with it. So I think that's what parents are really, that is what's made parents so angry, that they've damaged lives. And yet you're just going, well, do you know what? We'll just take it away from you, and get away scot-free. And I really think that is the unfairness that has made all the parents that turned out to the protest. That's what's angered people more than anything, really. And it could have been avoided.
Look, I absolutely agree with parents that we need stronger accountability on local authorities. I think that is a critical role of the Department for Education. It's something we're taking forward right now. We're not waiting for the reforms to come in. And I completely understand the frustration of those who have been failed by the system. But I don't think for too many it's not working. And the intention of the reforms is to try and change that.
I was going to move on to a different question here, which is, have you actually done a poll of parents and students to ask if they think inclusion in mainstream in hubs is a good idea? Because I've yet to meet someone who does, is what the question says.
So we haven't done a poll as such, but we've done a huge amount of engagement with parents, young people and teachers, as I've said. And I think what I've heard in that engagement is that there are some cases, the inclusion bases, or they've been called different names, have been a real positive experience, and some that they haven't, and that there's a huge variability in quality. But I have met parents who have said they've been life-changing. And schools where the provision is really extraordinary. And I think that I was in a primary school recently that had a resource base, and the head's ethos of it was that inclusion has to start from the mainstream. Like, the whole mainstream school has to be set up for the students who are in that inclusion base, but sometimes they need that quieter space to be able to have that dedicated support, but that they are part of that whole school environment. They have like a house system in the school, sports days, and they have friendships across the school. And I've spoken to parents whose children have been out of education for a long time, and that they found a place, a resource base in their community, and that it they were saying it had been completely life-changing. And just before Christmas, talking to mum who said her child was in the school play and she never had thought that was possible. So I have met parents who had a really positive experience, but I really acknowledge that variability and how critical it is that these bases are of a high quality, that they have the right specialist support if they're specialist bases. And I think it's actually important to take a step back for those who haven't seen the detail, that when we're talking about inclusion bases, we're talking about two different types of base. One is a support base, which might be a sensory space. It might be a space for small group intervention, a place for young people to come and re-regulate and go back into their lessons. And a specialist base that would provide more day-to-day specialist support, where children would probably spend much more of their day, if not all of their day, in that space, providing that kind of specialist support within a mainstream setting, but still integrated within the mainstream school environment. And so that we're talking about those two different spaces. But when we're talking about either of these, they have to be high quality. And I know SNJ, you've been working with a whole number of partners at the DfE to develop guidance for inclusion bases that will be setting out what we mean by a high quality inclusion base, both a specialist and a support base. And that's something that we want Ofsted to inspect, to make sure that these are genuinely providing an inclusive and high quality environment for children. And of course,
are you going to make that statutory though? Because it is non-statutory guidance. And I asked my sister, who is a primary school teacher, what do you do with non-statutory guidance? And she just laughed. It did nothing, basically. If it's not, they've got so much to do, so many things coming in, that it's not statutory. forget it. So can we make it statutory?
I think the critical thing is that Ofsted are going to be inspecting these bases, and I think schools are, for those, and I'm sure that anyone who works for schools will know that Ofsted, they're looking at them is really, really important, and in making sure that they're seen as a full part of a school, that they're providing that high quality education, and if they are providing a specialist provision package, that they meet those national standards. So the proposal isn't for the guidance to be statutory, but the proposal is for Ofsted to inspect them.
Can I ask a related question? So one of the questions that has come up here is about Ofsted, actually. And I think a lot of people do feel that Ofsted is part of the problem, actually, that has led to children being kind of excluded and marginalised. So this question says, while the curriculum is so demanding and Ofsted so focused on attainment, won't schools always be pulled in two directions, either towards inclusion or towards Ofsted / attainment? And it does seem that there's a bit of a tension here between Ofsted inspecting on something when actually they're precisely the ones who've pulled the standards over things like attendance and exam results. Those are the drivers behind children with SEND being turned away from mainstream schools, and now they're going to be inspecting on inclusion and bases. Can they be trusted?
Yeah, so I think that as I said at the beginning, this is a real shift to continue to focus on children's academic achievement. It's really important, but also their inclusion and sense of belonging, and we don't see those two things at odds. And the schools white paper as a whole is setting out a vision for schools, which is asking schools to focus on belonging and inclusion as a core part of what they do. And there's kind of changes we're making for the whole school. So for example, we're asking all schools to develop a pupil engagement framework that looks at pupils' sense of belonging and well-being at the school, which hasn't been in place previously. And we're changing the way we look at accountability for GCSEs. So people might know that there used to be something called the EBAC, which was a very narrow set of subjects that schools could be kind of essentially rewarded for
baccalaureate.
Yeah, for children achieving in. So we're extending Progress 8, which is the main measure for schools, the progress schools make with pupils, to include a broader range of subjects like the arts. So it gives a kind of broader curriculum. And the other change that we're proposing in a separate consultation is a new progress measure that looks at low prior attainers and celebrates the progress that schools make with low prior attainers, again to support schools to take that more inclusive outlook. And then Ofsted's inspections have changed. So Ofsted's inspections now look at inclusion as a core part of that inspection. And so those changes, the full inspections only started this year. So in January, there were voluntary inspections at the end of last year, and it's a new framework that has inclusion as a core part of it. So again, that is part of changing the system. So we are really focused on inclusion as a core part of that. And then the other, you mentioned the curriculum as well, and that's we've just had a curriculum review, and we're currently working through a new curriculum, which again I think is a real opportunity to support engagement of pupils in school. And part of that work is looking at the flexibility and adaptations for children with SEND.
If I could come in, so you've just mentioned one of the things that's important to you is around inclusion and belonging. And one of the messages, I wasn't at the protest at the weekend, but I watched as much of the live stream as I could. But certainly one of the messages that was loud and clear at the weekend was that a sense of inclusion and belonging is often only achieved in specialist provision for lots of children and young people. And that's certainly also a sense of some of the questions in the chat that have been coming through this evening. Now, I'm, as you know, Minister, I'm very keen on mainstream inclusion, and that's what my daughter did. But I'm also very aware that there is growing concerns about the fact that the direction of travel is towards greater inclusion into mainstream schools, and maybe parents at the moment are not feeling reassured. They're not seeing enough in the reforms that is convincing them that their children will feel safe or be safe, that their children will belong, that they will feel part of that school. So whilst it might look great on paper, how can we, not we, you, bring parents along with you on this in terms of your intention around sort of mainstream inclusion, and what do you see as the ongoing role for specialist provision?
Thanks, Sharon. So firstly, I think special schools, specialist provision will continue to play a critically important role in the new system as they do now, and we want to develop much more of a continuum between mainstream and special schools, so they're working much more in partnership, and part of the experts at hand service will not just be occupational therapists and educational psychologists, but outreach from special schools and specialist teachers, and indeed alternative provision, which often have hugely important expertise that they can build within mainstream schools. And so yes, we see them as important, and for some students they are absolutely the right space for them to get an education. But we really believe that children with special educational needs and disabilities should be at the heart of our education system. Our schools should be able to welcome the children from their local community. And if that is not working, which it is not for many children, then it is the education system that needs to change to be able to put these children at the heart of our communities. Because there is for many children, and where it does work, and there are schools, primary and secondary schools where I've visited, where children with special educational needs and disabilities are really thriving, and lots of different things have come together to support that to happen, and they do have that sense of belonging. But things do need to change, and that's and there's lots within that. There's it's about the buildings and the space, it's about the training, it's about the investment, it's about the expertise we're bringing into schools, it's about the culture, it's about the accountability, it's about curriculum. All of those things need to come together to deliver that inclusion, and it's something that we need to build over time. And we're not, that's why we're taking our time with these reforms and putting the investment in upfront.
Have you visited the schools that are not getting it right? The schools that are telling children and their parents at the door, we can't meet need, before they've even spoken to them, where they put barriers and blocks in place, or the schools that parents are saying have caused trauma and real harm to their children? Because obviously we've all seen the lovely videos that have come out from the department and from the ministerial team, but they seem to be obviously in schools and settings where things are going well. And I think it would be good to hear your views and your experiences of talking to those settings where actually maybe there's a lot more resistance to inclusion.
Yeah, and I think that we deliberately tried to develop videos that showed some of the best practice, because I think a lot of parents were saying that they hadn't seen good practice, and so they wanted to see how it could work. But absolutely, I visited a lot of schools which are struggling, and I'd say more that they're finding it really hard. And I was at a school recently where the SENCO, the support staff, had an outreach program from a special school that was helping them with curriculum. They had an informal base, but that had been cut, and they were really struggling to find the right support and expertise, and they desperately wanted to, but they didn't know what to do, and they felt really alone in that. And so some of the poor experiences schools have had have very much informed the proposals in terms of the support, the outreach, the investment. But I think your point is about where, for those schools who are who are choosing not to deliver inclusion. And I think for me, that is where the accountability is critical. The not just Ofsted, but the accountability at the department. And one of the things that we have said as part of the schools white paper is we will be monitoring much more closely off-rolling, pupil movement, from exclusions to off-rolling, to really understand the flow of pupils in the system and what that can tell us about schools, and also the demographics of the schools, and how they link to their local communities and whether they reflect those local communities, and that will be the part of the picture of that we as a department have to tell us something about the inclusion of those schools. And I went through some of those different layers of accountability on multi-academy trusts as well. And one of the other things that has came up really strongly through the engagement was around reasonable adjustments, and lots of parents saying that one of the biggest barriers for them was like what might feel simple but are critically important reasonable adjustments, such as a child not being able to wear certain materials because of the sensory impact, or needing to have some time out of like a movement break or some time out to re-regulate, that those things hadn't been put in place. So one of the other proposals that we've put in is to develop guidance with the Equality and Human Rights Commission around reasonable adjustments to provide much needed clarity for parents and for schools.
So we're coming towards the end. Two questions that are really important that we have to get in. One is about, and I know that there is the complex needs group that you are actually, people are asking about the definition of complex needs, but I think you are working on that with the complex needs group. So I think that's in hand. But with more children in mainstream, you are going to need more TAs, more staff, and more SENCO time. There have been recent surveys from TAs saying they're planning to leave the profession, there aren't enough TAs. And also from SENCOs, there is all the SENCO workforce studies that were saying that they need protected time to do that work, to be able to concentrate and focus on those children. And they can't be a class teacher and the head of year and all those other things. But that's not in the white paper. Will you please look at that and make those SENCOs, enable them to do the work that they've trained for?
Yeah, so I think SENCO, we've had a lot of responses from SENCOs as part of the consultation, and it's another area that we are looking at, both like what is the role of SENCOs and what is the responsibility of school leaders and teachers, because I think that for some SENCOs, they describe feeling like they're alone in a school trying to drive this agenda, whereas this has to be something that the SENCO plays a really important strategic role, but every single teacher is trained to support children with SEND, that we have that broader range of expertise in the classroom. And I talked about the new investment, and I think the important thing to say, because I could see some comments coming through that saying it's not enough investment, and we're putting 1.6 billion into the inclusion mainstream fund that goes direct to schools, 1.8 billion into the experts at hand, and 3.7 billion into creating new specialist places. And I won't go through all the investments, but there is a significant amount of investment going in. But in the inclusion mainstream fund is going in at the same time as the existing funding continues to go in through EHCPs. Over time, we expect to see a higher proportion of the money for SEND going directly to schools, ring fence for children with special educational needs and disabilities, to build out that core provision so more children's needs can be met in mainstream school. And we do have many children who are in mainstream schools already with special educational needs and disabilities. We want them to have a much better experience, supported earlier, and those children who do need specialist provision to have access to that.
Just want to really wrap up now and say thank you so much for joining us tonight, Georgia Gould. I hope that we'll be able to push some of those questions onwards towards it. Will be so many questions, because there just are. I would like to say thank you to, as well as yourself, to all those people working behind the scenes for us. That is Matt, Diana, Habiba, Francis, and Rachel. and everyone here for all your fantastic questions. And the recording will be ready as quickly as I can humanly turn it around. Don't forget, the consultation closes on the 18th of May. So from all of us, it's just time to say good night and thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.